Hi there, Prairie Plant Girl here. I thought I'd bring you along today. I'm going to be doing some pruning and tying up of my tomatoes and just some general care that is good to do and get started this time of year and then keep up with for the rest of the summer. So as you can see, if you followed along with my channel, I've taken the cozy coats, well of water off my plants here, and they're fully exposed to the elements now. I garden in Saskatchewan, Canada, and our last frost date is usually about May 24th. I think it was closer to the 30th this year before we had our last frost, but now we've had lots of very hot weather and it's time to let these guys stretch their arms out and grow strong for me. So let me bring you in and I'll just show you a few ways to just help keep your tomato plants healthier and growing strong throughout the season. So there's two types of main types of tomatoes that you want to be aware of when you're looking at pruning and staking your tomato plants. So there's the indeterminate type and the determinate type, or some people will call them bush and staking. So the staking or indeterminate type of tomato will just keep growing taller and taller and taller and taller, and often they'll get 6 or 8 feet, I don't even know, maybe taller in longer season climates. And they will just keep producing throughout the entire season. The bush or determinate type tomato kind of has a determined size that it'll grow to, and it tends to put on most of its flowers and set most of its fruit around the same time, usually within about a month or so. So you deal with these two types of tomatoes a little bit different, and I have two examples right here. This right here is a bush Roma tomato, and this is a black Krim, and it's a staking tomato. So as you can see with the black Krim, I've put in a nice tall stake. I think this is about a 5 or 6 foot tall stake here. And what I'm going to do today is start tying it off to the stake so that the wind can't break it off, because these plants can get really tall and you want to make sure that they're protected from the wind, and we have a lot of wind here. Another thing I'm going to be doing is going through, and you can see this is a really good example right here of a sucker, this piece right here. And what it is you have your main stem going up the tomato plant, you have your branches coming off, and they come off kind of almost usually at almost a 90-degree angle, and then in the middle you'll have suckers growing. So you don't have to remove the suckers, but removing the suckers will help to keep this plant under control a little bit, because it does get so tall, and if you have a lot of extra branches in that, it can get quite large and reduce air circulation around your plants. But also the common thought is that you'll get more tomatoes because each of these will produce more flowers and more tomatoes, but you'll get smaller tomatoes because there's so much energy going into so much tomato production. So it's very easy to take these suckers off. Just give them a little snap and they'll come off. Or if you like, here's another one right here. Here's the main stem, here's the main branch, and there's the sucker right here. You can just go in with your snips. Now, if you're looking to produce more tomatoes plants, this is a great thing to use, and you can just dip it down in some damp soil or in a cup of water, and it'll produce roots most of the time. So I'm going to go through this plant here, and I'm just going to look for all of the side shoots, and I'm going to be, or the suckers, and I'm going to be taking those off, and then I'll be tying it to the stake. Here's an example of a sucker that's gotten very large. So this is a sucker, even though it's so large, and the main branch is right here. So I'm going to take that sucker off. So now that I've gone through and taken the suckers off, and there were quite a few because I haven't done this yet, I'm also going to look in any branches that are touching the soil. I'm going to remove those as well. Now, some people will remove all of the branches up to a certain point on your plant. And I often will come in once they start to produce. I'll come up to the lowest flower and I'll remove the branches up to there. But for now, because it hasn't started a lot of flower production yet, there's one flower way up here, but I'm going to wait and see if it throws off any more throughout the rest of the plant. For now, I just want to make sure anything touching the soil is lifted off, because the reason you take these branches that are touching the soil off is when water splashes up off the soil onto the leaves, you can wind up with some disease issues happening, and we don't want that. So this just helps to prevent disease moving through the plants. Another thing is, you may notice that I have my plants planted very closely together, so removing some of that bottom growth can help the air flow through between the plants, the same as me removing the suckers. Oh, I missed one. There's a sucker. That'll also help to get the airflow moving around, which will help keep your plants healthier. So now that I have the bottom leaves lifted off, I'm just gonna take my tie. Now this is just a coated piece of wire. You can use these little Velcro ties. Sometimes if I have old gardening gloves that are getting really worn out, I'll just cut them up into long strips and use those for ties. So anything really will work. And you just want to put it around your stake and then cross it over and then wrap it around the stem of your tomato. So hopefully you can see that. And then tie it on, and you want to make sure that there's room for the plant to move around a little bit. Now if you're using something like the Velcro tie, you're not able to do that twist, but you still want to make sure that you're making lots of room. There's lots of room in there so the plant can still move around, but it's being supported by the stake so that it's not going to get broken off in the wind, or when it gets a lot of fruit on it, that heavy fruit can also make it knock over. So you just want to make sure it has lots of movement there and isn't going to be rubbing against the stake. Like this branch here, I may wind up coming and taking this off if it looks like it's really going to be rubbing on the stake here. I wonder if I can get it around behind. There, and that makes it looser, so maybe it won't hit the stake, because if you're rubbing on the stake a lot on your plant, you can open a wound that could promote disease as well. So once I'm done pruning and tying off my tomato, I'll just go through with some mulch and mulch around the plant, and that's just going to help to conserve moisture, so that the plants have a nice even supply of moisture, and it helps to keep the root zone cool. And with tomato plants, because they will root along their stems, so it's okay, it's safe to put mulch right up against their stem like that. And in fact, I like to pile it up, and they can grow more roots into the mulch if they want to. This plant has a great example right here of where you would see the roots coming out of a stem. So it's not all these little hairs, but I don't know if you can see these little dots, these little white bumps here. That's what would produce roots if it was covered in soil, and you'll find them all along the stem. So let's look at the bush tomato. So with the bush tomato, we're going to be doing a lot of the same things, but they are treated a little bit differently. Like I said, they're not going to get as tall, and they're not going to be producing fruit for as long of a season. In my short climate, I find that they do, once they start producing, they tend to produce pretty much right up till frost for us here, but I have 110 days of frost-free growing time generally, so that gives them enough time to, start flowering and produce the fruit and be done. So you can leave the suckers on these plants and get just as much production as you can off of them. It may result in a little bit smaller fruit, like I said before, but they're producing so much all at once, and you want to usually get as much as you can off of the plants. So what I tend to do is leave some of the suckers, take some off, just to get a lot of fruit production without taxing the plant too much. And I'm also going to be taking off these lower leaves that are at the ground level. Now, these tomatoes, because we tend to let them get bushier, bigger, and they set like all their fruit kind of at once, they can get very heavy. They can really, once they start to set fruit especially, start to get really thrashed around by the wind. So it is still a good idea to have a stake for these plants. And sometimes I find you may need to add an extra stake just to give it extra support, because they do get so big. So I'm going to take this one out for just a minute so you can see, and I'm just going to go through again, and I'm going to remove those lower stems and any suckers down at the bottom. That'll just give it a little bit of airflow and lift the leaves up off the ground, and leaving a few suckers so that it can produce as much fruit. So again, I'm going to tie this off to the stake in that same method. And like I said, it might be helpful to put a second stake in. If you're going to use a tomato cage with a tomato, you want to get a stronger, sturdier, as strong and sturdy of a cage as you can. A lot of tomato cages are quite flimsy and they won't support the weight once the tomato grows. And I wouldn't use a traditional tomato cage for a staking type tomato. You can use a very tall, they do make some very tall type sturdy cages, and if you can find one of those, that's what I would use. But the standard little 2-foot tomato cages just won't support the staking tomatoes. But if you can get a heavy duty one, they'll work well for the bush tomatoes. But I find just using the stakes, using the stakes works well for me, and it gives me more room to move around. I do plant my tomatoes close, so this just gives me more room to move around through my tomatoes. And again, I'm going to put some mulch down on the ground here. Once I do that, I may need to remove this leaf here as it's hanging down. And that's something I find with the determinate tomatoes. Sometimes the main branch tends to, because it comes out more at a 90-degree angle, it'll hang down more to the soil. Sometimes leaving the sucker, which comes up more at that 45, will keep the branch off the soil and give you those tomatoes, and you can take these off. And in fact, I think I'm just going to do that right now. Just take this one off. I'll leave this little sucker here because I can see there's just a little bit of discoloration on this leaf here, so I just want to make sure I'm not bringing any disease in. So I'm going to put some mulch down, and then I'm going to continue going through and doing my entire tomato bed. So hopefully you found this helpful. Hopefully it gives you some confidence to go out into your tomato beds and do some pruning, some mulching, and some staking and tying off. and that will just help your tomato plants to be healthier and give you a higher fruit production when the tomatoes start coming on. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one. Bye. My roses are close. Full of buds.